Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to episode 31 of It's Murder Up North. First of all, I want to say a huge thank you to Sheila Moore for becoming my latest Patreon member. Your support is greatly appreciated. If, like Sheila, you wish to support the show, you can do so from just $1 a month. Please visit Patreon/It's Murder Up North. My podcast of the week is All Things Eerie from Erie, PA. The host cafe is absolutely delightful to listen to, and on a personal note, she is one of the kindest and most supportive people I've met. So please show her your support and check out her podcast today. Here is a sneak peek.
Hey everyone, this is Kathy, the host from All Things Eerie from Erie, PA. If you like true crime and some paranormal, come on over and give us a try. We're available on Spotify, Podbean.com, iTunes, and Facebook at All Things Eerie from Erie, PA. You never know. You just might find out why it's so eerie in Erie, PA.
Now, let's head to the episode. Today's episode is dedicated to the family of Clare Wood, who lost her life at the hands of her partner, and to her father, Michael Brown, who passed away on the 18th of July 2020. Michael stated, quote, "They may be 30-odd years old, but they are yours to protect. As a father, that was part of my duties. It doesn't matter how old they are and that you've let them go. You've got them on elastic so that if anything goes wrong, you can bring them back to you, make it okay. I wasn't able to do that for Claire." Following the death of his daughter, Michael campaigned tirelessly for a new law which would enable men and women to find out if a new partner had a history of domestic violence. This law became known as Clare's Law. In this episode, I have used quotes by Michael to help tell Clare's story. It is estimated that 1 in 4 women in the UK become victims of domestic abuse. This isn't just physical, but it can be mental, financial, verbal, and sexual. Due to the nature of domestic abuse, the loss of control, isolation, and the fear of reprisal the victim suffers, this can prevent them from reporting their partner's actions, which is why the figures cannot be accurate. It is also believed that due to the current global pandemic, the number of domestic abuse cases will have increased sharply. Clare Wood grew up in the market town of Batley, which sits in between the cities of Leeds, Wakefield and Bradford. Batley is one of the many traditional mill towns in West Yorkshire, and on certain days the air is filled with the delicious aroma that emits from the Fox's biscuit factory. In recent years, the town made national news when Member of Parliament Jo Cox was murdered as she exited the local library just before 1 p.m. on the 16th of June 2016. Jo's life and legacy will be featured in a future episode. For Clare, it was where she lived with her mum Sheila, her brother Adam and her stepfather Michael, who described her, quote, "Clare was a lovely little girl. Did all the girly things, brownies, guides, before turning into a bonny teenager, who had her share of boys knocking at the door. Clare was a free spirit. She never brought trouble to the door. She was a canny lass with a wicked sense of humour." Michael recalled one of his fondest memories, quote, "Clare came to me at 15, after I'd been married to her mum Sheila for the better part of 10 years, and said, 'Dad, you're running out of time. You can't adopt me when I'm 16. Let's do it now.' I was proud as punch." Responding to her request, Michael formally adopted Clare and her brother Adam. Although he had always considered the children his own, the paperwork just made it official. Batley and the surrounding area is home to many clothing factories, and it was at one of these that 16-year-old Clare began working after leaving school. However, 2 years later, she left her hometown and moved 50 miles away to the city of Manchester, where she fell in love with the vibrant atmosphere and nightlife. Manchester in the late 80s, early 90s was at the beating heart of UK music, and the club scene was electric, with huge nightclubs such as the Hacienda welcoming thousands of revellers. Clare didn't just fall in love with the clubs, she also met and fell in love with Justin, the man who she would marry. Michael described her new husband as, quote, the ideal son-in-law. They were the typical married couple, living a normal life. By the end of the 90s, Clare had given birth to a little girl. However, in 2004, at the age of 31, Clare was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which is described by the NHS as, quote, a mental health condition that affects your moods, which can swing from one extreme to another. Unlike simple mood swings, each extreme episode of bipolar disorder can last up to several weeks or even longer. These can range from severe depression to manic episodes. The pattern of mood swings in bipolar disorder varies wildly. For example, some people only have a couple of bipolar episodes in their lifetime and are stable in between, while others have many episodes. It was around this time that Clare and Justin separated. Her father reflected on this, stating, quote, things didn't work out within the marriage, and she ended up going to Carlisle. Before moving back to Manchester to be closer to her daughter, she was happy as Larry and had a place with a garden for her daughter. The decision had been made that their little girl should live with her father, and Clare would spend time with her on a regular basis, allowing Clare time to work on her health. By all accounts, this seems like an amicable decision, and the couple may have felt that this was the best option to ensure their child was well looked after. Clare moved to a 2-bedroom semi-detached house on St Simon's Street, a cul-de-sac that sat adjacent to Blackfriars Road, which ran directly into Manchester city centre. It's a route I am familiar with, as when I lived in Salford, I walked past the cul-de-sac on my way to work, unaware of the awful crime that would occur there. Incidentally, the show's cover art is a picture taken by my brother-in-law of Blackfriars Bridge, which crosses the River Irwell and lies just half a mile from Clare's home. Newly single and settling into her new home, Clare and her family were dealt a devastating blow when on February 2005 her mum Sheila passed away from cancer. Following the death of her mother, Clare sought to find romance, but found she was unlucky in love. She entered 2 relationships which subsequently failed. By 2007, Clare had signed up to a number of online dating sites in the hopes of finding a partner. On one site she wrote, quote, I am a talkative, affectionate woman who would love to hear from someone who is relatively sane in my area. I would like to meet a respectful, affectionate man. Not looking for a one-night stand, so if this is what you want, walk away. Also, someone who likes a larger lady is an advantage, but must be flexible, as I am shrinking rapidly. This description gives an insight into her confident and fun nature, but the line that strikes me is when she refers to herself as, quote, a larger lady. Was this just a light-hearted comment, or had she revealed an insecurity that the wrong man could prey upon? Her father stated that Clare was insecure about her appearance, and she struggled with her weight, which affected her confidence. However, in April 2007, Clare started talking to a man called George Appleton on a Facebook group. They talked for hours, and feeling there was a spark, they agreed to meet up for a date. It transpired that Appleton lived in a flat just a 2-minute drive from Clare's house, and he had friends who lived on her street. George made Clare feel special and attractive. He was affectionate, attentive, and complimentary. And she was attracted to his confident and likeable personality. Her father recalls, quote, Clare had told me she had fallen in love, and I was pleased she was happy. That's all any parent wants. Michael was content that Clare had found someone whom she seemed happy with. However, this initial delight was tarnished when her father first met George Appleton. He recalled how gleeful his daughter was when she brought Appleton to visit the family in Batley. George confidently shook Michael's hand as Clare proudly presented him to her father. But Michael was unable to share his daughter's happiness. As he looked at the sandy-haired man who stood before him, her father felt uneasy. He described his first impression of George as, quote, scruffy, balding, unshaved, greasy top, jeans and trainers that had seen a better day. I took one look and thought, if this is what my daughter's settling for, she's certainly started at the bottom of the heap. He continued, I can't tell you what it was, but there was something about this lad that I did not want for my daughter. But children have to be allowed to make their own decisions. I had no right to interfere. She told me she'd met the love of her life. I was thrilled, until I met him. I told her I don't like your choice. Beyond that, I left well alone. Perhaps this feeling came from the fact that Michael had worked at the prison in Leeds. And in the years he had been there, he had encountered some pretty hardened criminals. And when Clare told him George had previous convictions for driving offences, this made her father even more uneasy. Quote, when I found out he had done time in prison, that made me curious. Clare said it was because of some motoring offences. Because of my job, I couldn't be seen reporting with ex-cons, and I told her not to bring him back. She understood why I said it. I would still visit her, and I was there fairly regularly. Despite her father's distrust of George, Clare was happy. She had found a man who was charming and respectful, and ultimately, Michael understood that as long as she was happy and healthy, he shouldn't meddle. He couldn't conceal his dismay when in early 2008, Clare announced that she was planning to marry George. Michael pleaded with her not to rush into anything, and even threatened that he would not attend the wedding. On reflection, Michael stated, quote, I couldn't believe it. I've never been one to hide my emotions, and boy did I tell her. After being in a happy and committed relationship with George for over a year, Clare was devastated to discover that George had been having relationships with other women. She had picked up his phone one day in October 2008, and there on the screen was a message from another woman, sent via the same Facebook dating site that she and George had met on. Angry and upset, she confronted him, and he admitted he had cheated on her, not just with one woman, but with 4 other women. Heartbroken, Clare then witnessed the darker, more aggressive side of George Appleton's personality. As the conversation escalated, he became extremely angry, to the point she was afraid that he would hit her. He accused Clare of betraying his trust and invading his privacy, and warned her to never touch his phone again. Terrified of this side to Appleton, Clare decided that she could not be with a man who was so volatile, and despite being madly in love with him, Clare ended their relationship. Her father remembered, quote, I was chuffed to bits when I heard she'd finished it. Clare did not disclose to her father the reason for the split, nor did she inform him of her visits to the local police station 5 days after she had ended the relationship with Appleton. When Clare entered Pendleton Police Station on October 7, 2008, she told officers that she was afraid of George Appleton, whom, following being rejected by Clare, had become enraged. He had sent her threatening messages, stating he was going to kill her, claiming he would vandalise her property and burn it to the ground. The language Appleton used was increasingly abusive, and he was becoming more aggressive, on one occasion threatening to hit her with an iron. Her statement was logged, and officers accompanied the frightened woman back to her home. They gave her advice and ensured the property was safe, then left Clare in the house, alone and terrified. It wasn't long before Clare was in touch with the police again. Less than 24 hours later, she called 999, as Appleton was violently hammering at her front door and screaming for her to let him in. She waited for the police to respond. By the time an officer did arrive, Appleton had gone. However, this officer was not responding to her frantic 999 call. They had come to discuss the statement she had made the previous day, and the officer had no knowledge of the incident that had been reported that morning. It would later transpire that Greater Manchester Police attempted to respond to Clare's emergency call 26 times. Yet they stated that due to insufficient officer availability, they failed to attend. Manchester is a large city, with 2 major football teams and the second largest concert arena in Europe. However, on the day of Clare's call, there were no major events or incidents in the city. Could it be that cuts to the police numbers led to her call going unanswered? Despite the failure to respond to Clare's 999 call, and the officer being unaware of the incident, he did advise her that she should consider installing extra security measures, such as installing new locks on the windows and doors. He also provided Clare with information regarding local agencies that assist those who are victims of domestic abuse. The officer left Clare's home and headed to the tower block where George Appleton's flat was located. The 40-year-old was arrested on suspicion of criminal damage. However, after being held at the police station for a few hours, George was subsequently released on bail, on the proviso that he does not attempt to contact Clare, and that he must not go to the area where she lives. Once again, there is a breakdown in communication. Although it was noted that George Appleton had been arrested, on the 9th of October the police response to Clare's 999 call is delayed 4 more times. That's 30 times in 24 hours. And it is not until 1 o'clock that afternoon that 2 officers finally attend her property to respond to the incident. These failings could have had devastating consequences. Clare had contacted them in fear of her life, as her violent and angry ex hammered on her door. Yet her emergency call was not answered for over 24 hours. What would have happened if he had managed to get through her front door? A month later, Clare and Appleton started seeing each other again. This meant he was violating the terms of his bail. It is not uncommon for victims of domestic abuse to return to their abuser. It is believed the victim will return, on average, 7 times before they are able to leave. The Blackburn Centre states, quote, "Domestic violence involves a pattern of abuse and control, and often involves a high degree of emotional manipulation. Leaving is not that simple. When you have been threatened by your abuser, believe that he or she will change, or are fearful that you cannot survive without him or her. Victims stay for a variety of reasons. They stay because of the hope their abuser promises that they won't hurt them again. The abuser may use the victim's insecurities or prey upon the fact that the victim loves them. I'm sure many of us have found it hard to end a relationship, so imagine how difficult it must be to walk away from someone who is able to manipulate you, charm and control you." When Appleton's bail hearing was held in November, a document was produced. It was a letter written by Clare and sent to the police requesting that charges against Appleton be dropped. She claimed his behaviour had changed, he had stopped taking cannabis, and she felt he posed no further risk to her, stating, quote, "After much thinking and a calmer state of mind, I was wondering if there might be a way of stopping the charges." Her letter did not sway the hearing, and the terms of the restraining order were kept in place. Appleton was still not allowed to see Clare. However, after George complained that the order prevented him from seeing friends who lived on Clare Street, the terms were amended to allow him to access the street but not approach his victim. As Alexandra Burke's haunting rendition of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, a song many consider to be about love and loss, claimed Christmas number 1, Clare spent Christmas 2008 at her family home in Batley. She seemed content. Michael recalled, quote, "She really enjoyed seeing everyone. We said goodbye and I phoned to make sure she got home okay." That Christmas was the last time Michael would see Clare. Although during her visit, Clare had told her father that Appleton was being a nuisance, she once again failed to tell him the full story. Appleton was harassing her constantly, via text and social media. Perhaps she knew what Michael would say, or she feared reprisals from George, or maybe Clare didn't want her dad to worry about her. Still, with his bail conditions in place, George managed to coerce Clare to his flat. Believing he wanted to talk and clear the air, she agreed to see him, but once there, Appleton sexually assaulted her. Clare reported the assault to the police early on the morning of January the 19th, 2009. which meant admitting that she had been complicit in him breaching his bail conditions. Shortly after Clare had lodged her complaint, Appleton called Greater Manchester Police at 2:45 on the morning of the 19th, inquiring if his ex had made allegations against him. And for some inexplicable reason, despite the severity of the allegations and his previous history of violence and threatening behaviour towards Clare, Appleton was advised that she had placed a complaint. 45 minutes after Appleton had placed his call, police arrived at his flat to arrest him for assault. He spent 12 hours in police custody before being released on bail until April the 20th, pending further investigation. While he is being held at the police station, Greater Manchester Police passed the case to their specialist domestic violence unit, who carry out a risk assessment and make further recommendations such as the installation of an alarm system, a panic alarm which will alert the police. What followed was a series of missed opportunities and signs that Appleton was posing an increasing threat to Clare. On January the 20th, 3 days after Appleton had allegedly raped her, I say allegedly because he was never formally charged with the crime, Clare was brought to the police station to be interviewed regarding the assault. However, the interview never took place, as the room was being used for another interview, and this was taking longer than expected. It was determined that Clare's video statement would be taken at a later date. 4 months after Clare had accused Appleton of making threats to burn down her home, a fire risk assessment was carried out at Clare's house, and one of the main outcomes of this was the removal of her letterbox to prevent accelerant being poured through the slot. Since Clare's complaint was made on the 17th regarding the sexual assault, Appleton contacted the police 2 more times to check if she had made any further complaints regarding him breaching his bail. He was advised she had not made any further contact. However, Appleton had been contacting Clare, indirectly on Facebook, by sending her group and game requests, and by poking her, which is a way of saying hello to someone on the social media platform. On January the 22nd at 20:12 in the morning, Clare called police to report that Appleton had been attempting to contact her on Facebook. Her call was logged, but at 5:30 that afternoon, she was advised the police had insufficient officers to respond. I wonder if this was dealt with as an isolated incident and was treated as nothing but a minor complaint, rather than it being seen in relation to the history of the complainant and the offender. It wasn't until 1 a.m. the following morning that officers attended her home regarding the complaint. However, once they saw that Appleton had been attempting to contact Clare, the 2 officers immediately arrested Appleton, but when he arrived at the station, the custody sergeant deemed that it was a minor breach of his bail, and the messages were not of a threatening nature, and as such, Appleton was allowed to leave. On January 23rd, Clare returned to the police station for her video interview, during which she admitted she and George had rekindled their relationship in November, and they had been in contact despite the bail conditions. She confirmed that they had met on a number of occasions, and the pair had consensual sex. However, she stated that on the 17th of January, she voluntarily went to Appleton's flat. Despite her telling him that she did not want to have sex, he forced himself upon her. Reading what happened next, I wonder if this admission of consensual sex and breaching the bail conditions tainted the manner in which the police viewed the allegations of rape, as when the report of the allegations against Appleton was submitted to the Crime Prosecution Service, the sexual assault allegation was missing. This may simply be because the police did not have enough evidence to take the claims to court. Despite being advised that Appleton should receive a warning under the Harassment Act on January 30th, when he appeared for his bail hearing, Appleton was only issued a fixed penalty notice for criminal damage. All Clare's other complaints were not addressed. On the 6th of February 2009, Michael became concerned that he hadn't heard from Clare in a few days, and she wasn't answering his calls. It wasn't unusual for Clare not to call, but she always returned her dad's calls, which prompted Michael to contact Clare's ex-husband and asked him to go to Clare's home to check on her. Perhaps she'd fallen ill, or had a fall. What Justin would find was beyond their worst nightmares. Justin arrived at Clare's red front door and knocked loudly. He went to the windows and peered through the glass. The house appeared tidy and there was no signs of Clare. All the windows were closed, yet he found the back door unlocked. Making his way through the house, he called out to Clare, but received no response. And as he entered the door to the master bedroom, he found out why. Before him on the bed lay the badly charred remains of his ex-wife, the mother of his child. Michael recalled the moment he found out, quote, "The next thing I know, I'm leaving my place of work, HMP Leeds. I get a telephone call to say, my daughter's body has been found." At first glance, it appeared that Clare had died after falling asleep while smoking. Yet the truth was much worse, as Michael remembered, quote, "It turned out that my daughter had been beaten, raped, strangled, and he had set her on fire, and they, the emergency services, had to use a cherry picker to get her out. My daughter died because some man couldn't understand the word no." It was estimated that Clare had been murdered on the 2nd of February, and police believed that their prime suspect, George Appleton, had accessed the house using his own key. He waited for Clare to return home from work, and at some point he attacked her. The assault was so brutal and swift, his victim never got a chance to reach her panic alarm. They continued to speculate that after he had killed Clare, he proceeded to set fire to her body, and in an attempt to cover up his crime, he placed an ashtray on the bed beside his ex, to make it appear as though she had been smoking. When police went to find Appleton, he had fled from his flat, and was believed to be driving a red Ford Escort. An alert was issued nationwide to aid in the apprehension of the murder suspect, and a criminal profiler was brought in to see if they could help provide information to locate George Appleton. While the search was underway, Detective Superintendent Jackson made a televised appeal stating, quote, "George, if you are hearing this message, please listen to me. I want to speak to you and urgently want you to get some help." These pleas fell on deaf ears, as Appleton failed to resurface. Police feared he may have sought refuge amongst the travelling community to whom he was believed to have connections. However, things changed when Appleton's car was found in a car park on a rundown street on the outskirts of Manchester city centre. When police recovered the vehicle, it appeared as though their suspect had been sleeping in it. What concerned the police more was the car's location, within a 20-minute walk of 2 major train stations, tram stations, and multiple bus routes, which would make it difficult to know exactly where he had gone. While CCTV was collected from the city centre and the major transport hubs, a search began, and on the 12th of February, police made the following statement, quote, "A search team has found a man's body hanging in a derelict building just before 1 p.m. Officers looking for the whereabouts of George Appleton found the body in Blackfriars. A formal identification has yet to be made." The derelict building was an old pub that lay 100 feet away from where police had found Appleton's car, and just half a mile away from Clare's house. I was unable to find a record of his estimated time of death, so cannot state if he ended his life shortly after he had killed Clare, or in the days that followed. Michael spoke of his daughter's death, quote, "She was the most kind, gentle, generous person you could ever wish to meet. He has stolen the most precious thing of all, a mother to my granddaughter. The last moments of my daughter's life were her kicking and screaming, trying to get away from Appleton." George Appleton's death robbed Clare's family of the chance for justice, and it was to bring them further heartbreak. In the 2 years that followed Clare's death, an inquest was held, as well as an investigation into Greater Manchester Police's handling of the case. The Independent Police Complaints Commission found numerous areas of improvement. They highlighted the fact that Appleton was told about the complaint made against him, quote, "Given the nature of Miss Wood's complaints, it was very naive to supply Appleton with such information, as it gave him the opportunity to either evade arrest or contact Clare." With regards to the delayed response to Clare's emergency calls, the IPCC stated that lessons could be learned to understand how and why this happened, and what could be done in future to prevent delays. The IPCC also signalled out the primary officer assigned to Clare's case. It was deemed that the officer had not acknowledged the seriousness of Clare's situation and failed to recognise a pattern of behaviour given Appleton's history. IPCC Commissioner Nazim Malik also commented on another case that the IPCC had investigated just a few months prior to Clare's death. Katie Boardman was murdered by her ex-partner, like Clare. Katie had been a victim of domestic abuse, and like Clare, numerous calls had been made to Greater Manchester Police. 5 of the calls were made in the week her ex-partner attacked Katie in her home. He stabbed her 82 times while her 2 children were in the home. In Katie's case, the IPCC found, quote, there was a total failure to consider the history and the increasing risk, and as a result the troubled relationship continued to fester. Having identified similar failings in both cases, the IPCC Commissioner stated that it was, quote, disappointing but unsurprising. In conclusion, the IPCC ruled, quote, although failures have been found in how GMP and individual officers dealt with Clare Wood's case, there is no failure that can be said to have been a missed opportunity to prevent the murder. Clare was not given the support she should have been, but that in itself cannot be taken as a reason to blame the police for the tragic outcome. In light of the review, Greater Manchester Police released the following statement. We recognise that there were some failings on GMP's part, and we apologise for them. Since the tragic events that ended Clare's life, Greater Manchester Police has made a number of force-wide improvements that significantly reduce the possibility of this kind of incident happening again. A domestic abuse steering group was established to review all aspects of our response to this type of case, and all frontline staff received dedicated training on how to better deal with people who are vulnerable for a range of reasons, be that through domestic violence, sexual crime, or mental health issues. Arising from that review, it was accepted that all agencies could have worked more effectively together. Every point that we have learnt from this tragedy will enable us to help victims better in the future. What we must also remember is that GMP deals with about 70,000 incidents of domestic abuse each year, and we endeavour to give victims the best support we can. Our partners play an equally important role, and we continue to strive to improve our responses to victims and bring perpetrators to justice. End quote. The most devastating part of the inquest was when George Appleton's history was revealed. Not only were Clare's family unaware of the abuse she had suffered, but they learned that Clare was unaware of Appleton's violent past. In 2002, he was jailed for 3 years for harassing an ex-girlfriend. Yet within 2 years he was out and had found a new target. Carol met George in 2004, and although he initially seemed loving and caring, he became increasingly controlling and possessive. After Carol's son witnessed Appleton attempting to strangle her, Carol decided to end her relationship. But this enraged Appleton further. He started to stalk her, following her to work and sitting outside her house. He would send her threatening messages, including claims he was going to attack her with acid. The threats and harassment stopped abruptly, but her story echoed what Clare had experienced, the only difference being that Carol lived to tell her story. Learning that his daughter's killer had a history of domestic abuse, and that he had served time in prison came as a shock to Michael. He believed that if Clare had been aware of Appleton's past, she would not have continued a relationship with him, and this started Michael on a path to creating Clare's law. He stated, quote, I was Clare's dad. I was supposed to protect her. This is her legacy. When you find out there are somewhere between 100 to 120 women, and 6 to 8 are killed every year by their ex-partner, you know something has to be done to change this. I just wanted it all to stop. End quote. spurred on by his desire to help protect others from his daughter's fate. For 5 years he fought for people's rights to be told if their new partner had a history of domestic violence. When he took his proposal to Westminster, he was faced with some opposition. Quote, "There was an MP saying, 'What about the man's human rights?' So I stood up and said, 'I don't wish to be melodramatic.' Before putting my shoes on the table, I said, 'My daughter was beaten, raped, strangled and set on fire. For the last minutes of her life she was alone. Stand in my shoes and tell me how that feels.' I'm not saying anyone should be able to turn up at a police station and demand to know what their partner has done. I want this for women and men who are in a domestic violence situation so they can see the bigger picture." End quote. Michael's tireless campaigning led to the introduction of the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, otherwise known as Clare's Law, in 2014. DVDs allow people to check with police if they are concerned their partner, or the partner of someone they know, might have a record of abusive offences, or pose a risk of violence or abuse. Quote, "When a woman makes a right to ask application under Clare's Law, she must have concerns that her partner is or will be abusive. Even if there isn't a criminal conviction disclosed under Clare's Law, this does not mean that the police's job is done and dusted. It is an opportunity for the police to build up trust with survivors, signpost them to specialist support services like Manchester's Women's Aid, and let them know that the police will always be there to listen to them, believe them and support them." End quote. Following the introduction of the law, Michael Brown received numerous awards and accolades. But as his sister pointed out following his death, he didn't do it for recognition. Quote, "He didn't want anyone else to suffer the same fate she did, and always said if he could save just one person from a life of domestic abuse, then his campaigning had been worth it." Clare's Law is technically a preemptive action, giving an individual the opportunity to leave a relationship before it develops. As such, it is impossible to know exactly how many lives have been saved. However, the death of Clare and others like her motivated her grieving father to take action. Since its introduction in England in 2014, Clare's Law has now been implemented in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and it is being trialled in Australia and Canada. Michael went to collect his daughter's belongings from her home. Inside a notebook he found the following letter written by Clare, which showed her intention to end her relationship with George Appleton. It read, quote, "There is no easy way to say this, but I don't want to be with you. Too much has happened. I am so unhappy I am at the stage where I don't even like you touching me, and that feeling is never going to go. You still scare me, and I can't be with someone I am frightened of. Don't contact me. That's the way it needs to be. I need to get on with my life. If you have any feelings for me, you will let me do this. Don't use this as an excuse to go off the rails. Bear in mind you were lucky enough not to go to prison again. I did give you a chance, and I had to do this by letter because you just won't listen to me at all. I have told you before how I feel, and you have chosen to ignore it, hoping it will go away. It hasn't. Each day I feel worse. I have to consider my daughter. Also, after all you've done, I can't have you back. It's not fair on her, and she knows I would never be happy with you. She can never trust you either. Take care. I mean it, Clare." Thank you for joining me for episode 31 of It's Murder Up North. Episode 32 will be available on Sunday. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.